Hello and welcome to this video tutorial on how to build your own Icinga web module. In the last video, we have seen how to create a web module, how it is structured and how we will activate it so that it is present in Icinga Web. And in this video, we will see how to create actual web content and how to display that in the web UI. Let's have another look at our Icinga module training, which provides additional content and has a lot more details about how to create your own web module. And an Icinga web module follows the model view controller pattern, which is a common pattern in web development. We have these three components and each of them has a separate concern. The model manages the data and the business logic, so storing, retrieving data, and the view will take care of anything that we see and interact with, and the controller is basically the manager of these two, so it'll manage the user input and update the model and the view accordingly. And this is reflected in our directory structure, which we see here. So as a reminder, we have the module which is called training, and in that module we have created, we can see it here, we have a module info file, and we have created an application directory which currently contains our CLI commands. And in this directory we will now create controllers which live in the controllers directory, and we will create views that live in our views directory. And the model will live in the library directory. So because the model is shared amongst the CLI, for example, and the web controllers, we want to place it in the library directory, which is a common directory. And then we can access the model in our controller and in our CLI, for example. So if we have a host, for example, could be a model which has an IP address and a name, and we want to access that in the web interface via the controller, and we want to maybe access it in the CLI. So that is why it lives in the shared directory here. All right, let's create a controller. For this, we will create a new directory under application. Let's do that, controllers. And we will create a new file called hello controller PHP. All right, now we need to set a namespace similar to the command line interface, which will live in Icinga module training and then CLI commands. This controller will live in Icinga module training, which is the name of our module we are currently developing, and it'll be in the controller's namespace, obviously. We will import some stuff. We will import the Icinga web controller class, which we will extend and which will provide some functionality that we will need. Let's create a nice little controller here. Let's just call it hello controller, and it'll do nothing for now. And each function we will add here, each method, will then provide a new endpoint in the web interface. All right, so this looks very similar to the CLI command. We will now create an action, sorry. Let's call it world action, similar to the CLI, just for fun. And yeah, that's that. I'll save. And now we should be able to call this controller. Let's give it a try. I first need to log in. And our controller is now listening on training hello with the action world. That looks horrible because we get an error. This is fine. It'll tell us, hey, you don't have a view yet for this controller. So the controller is up and running. And we can test that if we just simply var dump here for fun. Let's just try it. Hello. And exit. Let's see if that works. And yeah, it'll work. Now nothing loads because we exited really hard. That's not what we want to do usually. But just to prove our controller is working. Let's get that back to a more functional state. The controller tells us, I'm looking for this view and I don't see it yet. So let us create this view. We will now create a new directory called views. And inside it, we want to use another directory called scripts. And in this, bear with me, we need the hello directory. And now this will listen to the hello controller. And we need a file named like the action, which is world.phtml. And let's just say hello world here and give it a try. That works. So to recap, we created a controller which will, let's say, create an address which we can call. It'll map that endpoint, that URL, to a function, which is the world action, and you see the world URL corresponds to that. And now we can create corresponding views, which will then be shown when we call that URL. Right now, this is plain HTML. We can now add more and more functionality. We can also do something more elaborate over here. For example, we can use two small divs, which we call controls and content. And if we save and reload the page, now Icinga Web knows, okay, you want this to be the controls, so you will get a nice little separator here, and this is going to be the content, and now the padding and margin and everything looks just a little bit nicer. Right. Now, it might be a bit obscure that we have this URL here and nobody knows it exists, so we want to signal our users that we have something here that they can access. We want to do that by adding a menu item over here, so we can see the dashboard, problems, and so on. And we want to add a little menu item for our new URL here. We do that by registering a new URL or a new menu item in our config.php file. So let's create that now, configuration.php. And inside this file, we will now create a new menu section. Let me just do that. So we add a new menu section. We name it training, just for fun. You can name it whatever. We'll add a subsection called Hello World and set the URL to our new endpoint, which we have created in our controller. Let's store that and reload. And oh, it's in the wrong directory. Let me just fix that by moving it. And now it's there. So it needs to be in the root directory of our module. So at the base, if we close that, you see it's at the root directory next to our modules.info file. Right, and now you can see with training and the submenu Hello World, this will now lead to our new URL. We can also change the icon. As you can see, let me make that a little bit bigger. You can see it just uses a capital T for training. We can change that by setting an icon for this menu section. There is a function called setIcon. Let me just insert that here. And it'll take the name of an icon to set for this menu. Let me just reload that. And now you can see the thumbs up. And how and where do I know which icons are available? That is where the documentation comes in handy. We have, if we have activated the documentation module, we can see the developer style. And if we click here, we see how we would style stuff and how it'll look. And we can also see the icons in this tab. And these are all the icons which are available by default. So we can just simply copy, for example, this guy here, paste it, and save and reload. And now it uses the eye off icon. Now let's see how the controller and the view interact with each other. We don't have anything here, we don't set anything, we don't do anything. Let's change that, and we will use our view attribute. Let me just move that. And we will set, for example, the application field here and say, let's say this is Icinga web, just for example. Right. Now we have stored something in our controller, and we will tell it to update the view, and we just set this string. Now in our view, we can access this string. So we can simply say hello world, and then just add another paragraph and say which application this is from. Now this uses the PHP templating and will access the field application. Let's save and then reload, and it works. We now see the controller has set something here. Imagine this being something dynamic coming from a database or an call to something external. Let's just say foobar, which is my favorite thing in the world. And now let's update, and you see the controller updates something and the view takes it and presents it to the user. Of course, this goes for arbitrary complex data. We can, for example, load an array here. Let's just do that. Imagine that coming from a database which provides results from a call, from a select query, and we store it in the more data field. Let's save and switch to our view. And here, since we have a templating engine, we can simply use a for each now to display that data. So inside the content, we will iterate over the more data array and spit out the tables, rows, and columns here. Let's store that file and reload. That looks good. We now have the data coming from our controller. Again, this is a simple example. Imagine that data coming from somewhere else, and we can render it on the side here. With our data present, we can now have a closer look at the view, and we might want to style that view or that page a bit more. So what we can do now is add a public directory in the root of our module, and inside that we can create a CSS directory, and inside that all of our style sheets will go. We will do that now. Let's create a file called module.less. This is plain CSS. However, we can also use less as a preprocessor. Icinga Web ships with the preprocessor less by default. This is quite nice since we can use variables and some functions and some other nice quality of life features to plain when compared to plain vanilla CSS. But for now, let's just use plain vanilla CSS because it's also quite powerful. For example, let's update that table. That table should be a bit larger, bigger, wider. Let's do that, and let's just simply set the width to 100%. Let's save that and reload. it worked. So it now uses the entire width. Yeah, let's have a closer look at it, because something interesting is going to happen here. You might have noticed I'm using the all selector, so I would override each table which my web application would use in a normal HTML file. For example, if I do that, all tables would be 100% in width. However, this is not what we usually want. We want to isolate it to our module. And the nice thing is Icinga Web already does that for us. So if we inspect the table here, you can see it is prefixed with a class, and so class selector, and the class selector is automatically named from our module. So the name is derived from our module. So this is nice. So we now only catch or select our table here, and not any other table that would be in Icinga Web, which would be strange. All right. Let's update our rows a bit so that it looks nicer. Let's do that, and let's give it a try. Looks all right. We can also center this left if we want. So you see, we can now adjust everything we want, and the rest of the page stays the same. So we don't have to be concerned with breaking any other modules. That's quite nice. And like I said, we can use less, which adds a lot of functionality. We will link to the less documentation in the description. Now let's extend our controllers a bit more to have more functionality in our module. What we want to do now is create a library directory which will contain some shared code, which we can then share with our modules, with our components here, like the CLI commands and the controllers. So let's add something to have a bit more sample data. I'll do that by creating a folder called library, and underneath that, training. This name is important. It needs to be the same as your module's name. So example would be my module is called training, and thus I create the library training directory. If you have a module called director, for example, you would create library director. So and within this, we can now create all sorts of stuff which we then can use in our components. Let's, for example, create something that'll generate data. Let's create a directory class that will list the files in this directory. So I'll set the namespace. I'll use the PHP directory iterator just to list these files, create a class, and then just add a function for that class, a method, pardon. This looks good. So we just have a static function that'll take a path and then return an array with all the files in that path. So nothing too fancy, just to have some data. Let's save that. And now we can use that class in a controller, for example. Let's create another controller. Let's just call it the file controller.php. Let's create the controller. I will simply set the namespace, same as the hello controller. I'll import the just created class. I'll import the controller class, which we will extend. Let's do that. So we extend it, we call it the file controller, same as the file. We'll add a list action, and the list action will just take the module's current directory. So I will use this neat little helper to get the current module's directory, list all the files, and store that in the view within this field, so the files field. Let's save that and have a look at it. So we should be able to navigate to file and then the not show the list action. Right. So we get the same error as before. We don't have a view yet, so it'll warn us or yeah, tell us that. So let's create that view. So we now need to create a folder called file, and in the file we need new file, and we'll call that list.phhtml. It also tells us that here, so it'll say, hey, you need to create this. That's done. We don't see anything. Yeah, that makes sense because we didn't tell it to show us anything. So let's do that now. Let's just create some controls just to see that if it's working. It's working. And now let's see what we got. Let's add some content, close that, and we should be able to just dump the variable. Let's give it a try. And I just called it files. Let's do a var dump. That should work, or var export, just to see what's going on. Yeah, looks good. So we now see our application directory, the public directory, the README, and the other files in that directory. That looks good. So that's nice. I can work with that. But let's make it look a bit nicer. Let's create a nice little table for that. So let's remove that. All right, we got a table. We have a table header, and then we just iterate over the files and then just add a link for each file. So we can now click on it, and then it'll direct us to another page where we can do something with it. Let's just see. I'll store that, reload. That looks nice. We got a nice little table. You see it is selectable. That happens because I used the predefined class table row selectable. So this is nice. I can just hover over it, and the user will know that it is selected. And we used the Q-link, which is nice. It'll handle escaping and stuff like that. So I don't have to worry about any strange characters in the file names. So, and if we hover over it, let's have a look at it. These should be links now. They are. And you can see it'll point to the file show URL. And it has the URL parameter file equals configuration PHP, for example. This is because I set the this parameter, so the Q-link will provide a nice little provides a nice little option here to set the URL parameters. So I could click it now, and it'll show probably an error. So yeah. Page not found. Why? Because we didn't implement that yet in our controller. Let's do that now. So what we need now is to implement the show action here. Let's do that. Public function show action. And it won't take any parameters here. But what we want to do now is we want to retrieve that URL parameter. So we want to retrieve whatever we clicked, so library or public or whatever it is. So we do that by using the params function, params attribute, sorry, and the function is get required. So we want to say, hey, controller, give us please what is in the URL parameter file, and we require this. Otherwise, if it's missing, we'll get an error. I need to handle that. There's also another method called, I think it's just called get. Yeah, it's just called get, which wouldn't throw an error, which wouldn't throw an exception. But we wanna require this, otherwise we can't go on. So now we retrieve this and now we can work with it. Let's simply have a look at the file in detail. Let's see. So I will just join this to have a full qualified path and then just retrieve the file size and then just set it in the view. So by clicking on the file, I will just simply retrieve its size. So just for demonstration purposes. That looks good. Let's store that. And now we need to again create another view that will be addressed by this show action. So let's just do that now. HTML, PHTML, HTML, right? And let's don't do anything fancy here. Let's just display it and be done. So again, we want to see the details and then just display the file size, which we do here. Looks good. Let's give it a try. So it should work if I reload it. Yeah, looks good. Let's go back to our list and we can click on something else. Looks good. Yeah, so we can also add this to our configuration. Let's just add another menu item. Shouldn't be that hard. Let's just copy that one. Let's clean this up a bit by first declaring the section. So let's say this is going to be stored in section. And then we can just add submenus. So we don't need this anymore. We can then just say section and then use the add function. Right, like this. And then we can just add our submenus. So for example, let's add the hello world again, like this. So we will just now add the hello world again. Let's use the globe icon here. Hello world, the same path. We can now remove this. And we need to terminate that properly. I think it already is terminated properly. It looks good. All right. Let's see if that works. That works. And now we can just copy that and use it for our list, which we just created. So let's just say file list, for example. I don't know, let's use a wrench. And it's gonna say files, and we wanna use the file list endpoint here. Save this. I think it looks good. Let's reload. Right, now we got the training, let's call it main entry, and then the sub entries for our hello world and for our file list. And we can now click on it, see the details, use the browser's back button, or just click on the menu item here. Right, I think that concludes the video. And we're gonna extend this more and more in the upcoming videos. So our training module is gonna grow in functionality over the course of this video. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and let us know which topics you want to see in the future. Bye.